There was an entry in the Richard Dawkins website yesterday or the day before, I think it was, which was, well, they published a letter that had been published in either Scientific American or New Scientist, or well, some scientific journal anyway, about the Templeton Foundation and the positive or negative contribution of the Templeton Foundation to theology and science and their relationships and so on. But the thing that's jumped, one of the aspects of this letter that jumped out for me was a reference to spirituality. Well, it's quite a nice sentence. I can't remember it in detail, but it was something to the effect that there's a relationship between spirituality and religion. It's a little bit like the relationship between intelligent design and creationism. It's a word you use when you don't want to commit yourself to a fully fledged doctrinal belief system, but want to sort of vaguely indicate that you have a foot in that camp. So you don't say you're religious, you don't say you're Roman Catholic, or you don't say you're Jewish, or you don't say you're Muslim, you say you have spirituality. And I can kind of associate with that. It's a term I'm uncomfortable with because of that vagueness, really. And I would like it to be less vague in my mind, because I don't like being excluded from the use of certain terms, really. I like to have access to concepts and terms, and right now I don't really feel as if I do have access to that concept and term because I don't understand it enough. So, what am I trying to think about here? Well, I guess there's something to do with religion and spirituality. Those two terms that are mentioned in the original letter. I've spoken before about religion, and I can use that term for myself now, because for me, I'm going right back to its etymological roots as religare, from the Latin, meaning to join together again, with the implication being that something has been torn asunder, and there are mechanisms, conceptual mechanisms, practical, behavioural, psychological, interpersonal mechanisms for kind of bringing experience back together again. And religion is a word for that process. Obviously, most formal religions bring together huge areas of broken up bits of thought. A typical religion will provide some kind of answer to all the big questions, really. What happens after you die? Where did the world come from? Why is there evil in the world? What's the difference between right and wrong? That whole panoply of questions that have bothered philosophers forever, really, is usually answered by religion, which takes them all of those separate strands and ties them up into a neat little bow, appropriately, because of that term, religare, binding together again. So I have an understanding of religion as a word, meaning that, even though I wouldn't subscribe to any of the doctrines or belief systems of established religions. I have a much more kind of open source approach to it, but I can see the ambition as worthy, and if it produces reverence and awe and all those things as well, fine. That's all part of the binding process. But spirituality is different. I'm unhappy with spirituality, as implied by this respondent on the website and the journal. I'm unhappy with it being used as just some sort of vague term for a subclass of religious practice or religious experience, because then it just seems to indicate kind of woolly, spacey, new agey relationship. It's a kind of reverence with all the content taken out, or a sense of awe and mystery, without any real attempt to grasp what that mystery might be, or attempt to place that awe in any kind of context. So, for that reason, I'm not altogether sure about spirituality. The nearest I've got to a personal understanding of it for myself is through this as to understanding it as a kind of substance-based metaphor. And since I'm very interested in metaphors, that's not entirely surprising. Excuse me. When we use spirit or spiritual outside of that religious context or outside that metaphysical context, and we just use it in the real world, we use it to mean a kind of volatile liquid or a substance that lies kind of beyond liquid but before gas. It has that kind of methylated spirits, for example, or the spirits as it's used in chemistry. It has that odd property of vaporizing, of being there in front of you, kind of contained and kind of accessible to the senses, and then it volatilizes and has disappeared and may appear somewhere else. It may condense on the windows of your house or something like that, but generally it just disappears and becomes part of the world around you, invisible and untouchable. But spirits also tend to have, and I'm here again still talking about chemical spirits, also have this ability to drive things. Petroleum spirit drives our cars. It's not only highly volatile, it's also highly flammable and highly explosive. So it has this odd dual property of being simultaneously ethereal, literally, in the sense of like ether, but also destructive or constructive through its apparent ability to generate energy very easily. So I guess when I'm using the term spiritual, what I'm trying to get to here is that if I was to use the term spiritual, it would have to be drawing upon that metaphor, that embodied experience of a substance in the world that has those kind of properties. So if a person is spiritual, I would be suggesting that there is part of them which behaves a little bit like methylated spirits. Or if I myself claimed a spiritual experience, I would be trying to indicate that my experience of myself as having this too solid flesh has somehow modified, it's melted, or it's felt as if it's volatilized, it's felt as if it's expanded in the atmosphere, it's felt as if it's become distributed over a larger area, it's felt as if it's become part of the environment, it's felt as if it's no longer located within the container but has vaporized and volatilized. It doesn't make it any more real. That's kind of where I'm going with that right now. What I'll probably be doing is trying to link that idea up to other concepts which have a similar sort of ontology. Imagination, poetry, art, those kind of things which similarly, I'm just talking top of my head right now, which similarly seem kind of volatile and vaporous. Yeah.